Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Inside Movies Galore. I'm your host, David Streggy, and today I have the lovely Katie Cadaver.
Hello.
As well as Dane.
Hello.
As well as Brandon.
Yo.
And Kabuki J.
Hi.
So, today we're going to talk about a film that was filmed in 1975 by a director by the name of Bob Clark. And it predates a film that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, which it somewhat has something to do with. But brief synopsis of the film is evidently we have a sorority house that ends up having a prank call killer, and one by one they get they start to disappear. So starting over with Katie, was this your first time watching the film?
This actually was my first time seeing it all the way through. I had sat down to start it, and I don't know, I got distracted or fell asleep or something, and I never actually finished it. So I sat down this time, obviously, and watched it all the way through, and really enjoyed it quite a bit. Actually, I didn't have a ton of expectations for it. I just knew that it was one of those cult classics that I needed to see. So I kind of just went in with no expectations, and I was pleasantly surprised. I thought it, for 1974, it really seemed like it was ahead of its time to me in certain aspects. I thought there was a lot of great humor in it, which I always like in horror movies. So that was really a pleasant surprise. And it wasn't like cheesy at all. I thought the acting was really good. Everybody did a great job, and yeah, overall, I don't have anything negative to say about it. It kind of plays to the type of horror movies that I like. It felt a lot like a giallo film in the way that it was kind of a mystery, because we don't know who this person on the other end of the phone is, and obviously we know there's a killer in the house, and how this is, that whole like mystery of the whodunit. We don't actually see the killer, so that sort of point of view or whatever, like that kind of started that. But I'm sure we'll get more into that. But those types of things, those aspects of horror are things that really draw me in. So this movie had me right away. So yeah, I liked it, and I'm glad that I picked it.
Well, firstly, before I go on and ask anyone else's point of view, this was actually a Canadian production. So when you go about and discuss this film, you gotta look at how American remote this film. I mean, So heading over to Brandon, why don't you tell me, was this your first time viewing this film?
No, actually, I've watched this many times. Though my first introduction was through the remake, which is Black Xmas. Very enjoyable film. And then I
put the Christ back in Black Christmas.
But I ended up finding this one, and I really wanted to see it a while ago because of its historical value. When it comes to just the genre, I really like going back and looking at important films, and just because of its importance level, it had to be in my collection. So I had it in there, and I've watched it this is probably the fourth or fifth time. As far as it goes, I have my issues with it, but overall I consider it a very good film and a very solid film.
Okay. moving on over to Dane. Was this a first time watch for you?
Yes, it was. I'm surprised no one has said this yet, so I'll say it. Interestingly enough, so the director of this film, Bob Clark, you said the Canadian production thing. I think he is Canadian, or was. I don't know if he's still alive. But anyway, he was no. Well, he did this, and then he also went on to do another well-known Christmas film, namely A Christmas Story, which I find very funny because I'm not a big fan of A Christmas Story because I think it can be very needlessly unpleasant and horrific for kids. And I know I'm a minority, that's a minority opinion, but I just think that's funny considering that with this film, it's supposed to be horrific. And in that respect, he does a really, really, really good job at creating very good tension and suspense and subverting our expectations. And like Katie said, there's no just kind of obvious cheesiness or any kind of the acting's quite good. It's got a lot of people that were stars or would later go on to be even bigger stars, like obviously Olivia. I don't know if it's pronounced Hussey or Hussey or whatever. She was Juliet in Franco Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet, and then Margot Kidder would later go on to be Lois Lane in the Superman movies, and Keir Dullea, who's the boyfriend, he was in 2001: A Space Odyssey, and then trying to think who else stood out. But anyway, those are just some little bit of background there.
The
But
guy that played the detective, I forget his name, but he's like a detective in all the horror movies. He's in like Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah.
Well,
And
but anyway, like I felt like they really, I was just impressed with his ability to make a really good horror film in terms of uh it wasn't all that graphic, and yet it feels very disturbing because of the killer's just
What
the
you don't
voices that
see,
he yep, exactly. And the
just like Chainsaw.
yep, and and Psycho and all the greats. If anything, I'm surprised that this hasn't gotten a bigger reputation because it actually predated Halloween and was in the same year as Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and it does a lot of those same things right that those films did, with really good acting, and it's obviously a holiday themed horror film. Uh, and so yeah, I have wonderfully positive things to say. I'm just a little
what's
disappointed that it doesn't have quite as much mainstream recognition as I think it should have.
what's interesting before I move on to Jake's perspective is that there was a conversation that Bob Clark had with John Carpenter later on, and John Carpenter had actually asked him per se whether he would actually do a sequel to this film. And he said, no, in fact, this is the last horror film that I will probably do. But if I did one, I would do it in a mental hospital, and he would break out. He would go back to the sorority house and start killing them off one by one. Incidentally, later on, John Carpenter directed Halloween.
Well, and I think more specifically, Bob Clark mentioned it being a Halloween, holiday sequel as well. I don't know. I never heard that it was that detailed of a response about it. But from what I understand, it's basically as if Bob Clark's movie planted an idea in John Carpenter's mind,
Correct.
whether he knew it or not, to inspire him to create Halloween.
Well,
I don't know
And
that they
that summary-
discussed exact, a plot scenario or anything.
on the
I hadn't heard that.
on the Acre Bay Blu-ray, there's an interesting documentary that I was watching, where Bob Clark was actually talking about how John Carpenter had actually. So incidentally, he thinks it's very interesting how his character of Michael Myers broke out of a mental hospital and came back to Haddonfield and terrorized and started killing off the people, and that's exactly what he, told him how his sequel would happen. So
actually, that sequel is almost actually it is identical, other than happening in Christmas instead of Halloween, to the remake of the film. Pretty much, actually, it is totally identical.
The thing is,
breaks out of the hospital sorority.
The thing is, the Black Xmas tells more of a backstory involved in know who Billy really is, who this killer really is. We don't really know exactly who he is all the way up. We don't even know whether or not he was in fact the college boyfriend that had come back in the very end. But let's go on to Kabuki Jake's point of view. Was this your first time watching the film?
It was my first time seeing this version, although I believe Brandon had showed me previously the remake, so I at least was vaguely familiar. And again, because Halloween borrows a lot from this, I think I had a little bit of an idea of some things. But it's funny that you say Bob Clark said he wouldn't do another horror movie when his last credited feature film was Super Babies, Baby Geniuses 2, which I know a lot of people say is one of the most horrifying films ever made. He also did a TV movie that followed it called The Karate Dog that was pretty awful. But I had not made that connection with Bob Clark until we were just about to start. And yes, to answer, Dane, you wondered aloud about whether he's still around. He died in 2007.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, and he had been talking about a sequel right before his death. Apparently, I guess he wasn't happy about the remake or something. But and don't forget that he also did Porky's.
Well, it's just funny, that his. I don't know. It's just I think it's so funny that he's so good at doing this particular film, and he knows how to do suspense. He knows how to do have characters that are a lot like the characters. I think it was Margot Kidder. Her characters. Obviously she's a drinker and a bit of a troublemaker, but it's like she's still likable, and that's a problem that a lot of horror movies have, especially nowadays, is that they kind of think that if it's a horror movie, then they all have to be high schoolers or college students who are all just these horrible people that we can't wait to see die. And it's like, generally speaking, these were actually some pretty likable people. I don't think there was anybody that I really disliked.
Well, see, that's where, I was just going to say that's where Stephen King succeeds in a lot of ways where others fail, is because he always fleshes out his characters very well, so you get to know them before they die.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's nice though, because this does follow a lot of the slasher. Well, they weren't really tropes yet. They became tropes after the fact, but this follows all those things, and yet these characters are likable. There's a lot of genuine suspense. The villain
follows them, but not exactly. Like our first kill is the virgin, which is typically our final girl. So it sort of follows it, but not really. But of course, at this point, it would have been laying the groundwork for those.
The thing is about this film is I think that Bob Clark was doing things camera-wise.
Oh yeah,
what were never done before. I mean, you've got the view from the killer.
4 years before Halloween did it.
And when you just see his hand just slightly, go into that attic, I think it's an attic or wherever the heck he's going into, and you see his viewpoint as he's coming down from the ladder. you see that wavering camera movement as it's going up towards the house. I mean, these are things that were that set the tones for future slashers. So I think that this film is kind of like a grandfather of the slasher.
Well, it did the first person thing 4 years before Halloween did. Now, granted, Halloween did it really, really well too. I kind of actually think that this film did it a little better because it did it more often, and because the killer speaks, but in a very disturbing manner. Not just like the heavy breathing that Michael Myers does. It's like that adds the extra dimension to it. Plus the fact that this person clearly has a backstory of some kind, some reason why he's doing what he's doing, but because we don't know what it is, but it's clearly there, that allows us to guess what it is. And I think it sounds like, fit to me, based on the voices that he was using, it sounds like family strife and really strong-willed mother, kind of Ed Gein background. That seems to be how it came off to me. But I just think that was really effective. Plus, of course, the whole the calls coming from inside the house thing, which I think that it wasn't it When a Stranger Calls did that afterward. Um, and I mean, and not to mention, obviously, Scream would do that same thing,
Well,
obviously, as an homage to these kinds of movies.
scary movie.
It would probably be more effective to people who had seen it before all the movies that came later in that respect. But it was interesting to see where it came from. But I did want to also say a couple other things at the beginning. One being that one of the things that caught my attention, I went into this not knowing what I would think, but one thing that immediately had me going, "Oh, this might not be so bad after all," was the credit sequence. And yes, Dane already mentioned some of the notables, but I sat there going, "Oh, Juliet and Lois Lane are in this. That could be interesting."
and Dave from
And they, I didn't
2001.
know that until later. I looked that up and I found that out. And another of the cast that you guys mentioned, didn't mention, was what's her name that plays Phil, Andrea Martin, is the only member of the cast who came back for the remake. She played the house mother in the remake. And of course, I knew her from My Big Fat Greek Wedding and probably a couple other things, which is another totally random credit. But to bring Stephen King back into the mix, Olivia Hussey went on to play Audra Denbrough in the TV movie of It. So that was kind of when I realized that, I was like, oh yeah, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, she was an amazing actress and probably one of the most very talented and one of the most beautiful women of her generation, without a doubt. And that actually reminds me of something in terms of the historical context of the film and getting into characterization a little bit. One of the things I think that was very refreshing about this, especially when you saw the kinds of slasher films that came later, is the fact that we have all these sorority girls. They're all very distinct. They're not terrible. They don't just talk about men all the time. They have their own personalities, and they're all likable to various degrees. And then you have our main character, Jess, who is a very strong-willed person, very individual. She's not. She's able to be strong and individual without being unpleasant or unkind in any way. She asserts herself, but she is still very much someone who you would want to be around. And then this also was just in the wake of Roe v. Wade in the United States, and so you have, and obviously with the the early waves of feminism in America, and how both of those things together formulate this person who, is feeling comfortable in saying, I have hopes and dreams, and I'm not going to give it up for you, her boyfriend, and I don't necessarily want to have this child, because I don't want to. He's kind
Yes,
of
there's tons of feminist overtones. As a
when
female,
he's
I'd be
yeah
interested in speaking about that.
well, and we will.
Oh,
He
I'm sure.
is expecting her to follow the usual path from, uh, decades past, and she's not going to do it. And I think that's a very important bit of characterization, also important for historical context, and it still holds up. Like, it's not too in your face about when it was made, even though obviously when it was made is very relevant. But it's something that I think helps to separate this person from other later slasher protagonists or other supporting characters where they fall into the trap of, oh, they only talk about men and their relationship to men, and they're not really individualized in and of themselves. And it's like, look at that, that's nice. And this film's doing that long before any of these other ones were falling into that trap.
Katie, did you want to go into that?
Not really. I mean, Dane pretty much just said everything I would have said about that. But yeah, pretty much.
Alrighty.
I did have one little thing on that just, and maybe partly this is my personal feeling, but one unkind thing she did, I think, was telling them about, it was her decision, but I'd be like, she could have just gone and done it. But
Yeah.
the way he turned into a total doucher afterwards, I was like, ugh.
Well, I think she was trying to show him some degree of courtesy because they are
Well,
still
yeah.
together. I mean, they're still together somewhat, and she's trying to respect, his right to know. But at the same time, I mean, if she had gone and done it just, willy nilly, then it might have made things worse had he found out later. And and he just was.
She's just acting out of honesty.
Yeah.
That and honesty and respect for his just for the fact that they're together and presumably a couple and everything, but obviously which he was quite a and I have actually met Keir Dullea at Dragon Con in the past, but and I didn't even know he was in this, but otherwise I would have asked him about it if I had seen it. But anyway, his character was it was weird seeing him with the long hair because in 2001 he has the nice short NASA approved haircut, and but then here he's playing a real douche, obviously like a really just full of himself artiste,
Yeah.
and that was he played that very well, and it definitely shows that he's not a very enlightened or tolerant person when it comes to his girlfriend and supporting her in her dreams like he thinks he is when he's
Well, and I think
to.
it's definitely a reflection of the times.
Oh yeah.
In the mid 70s, that was still kind of what you did. If you got pregnant in college with your college boyfriend, you married him, and you sacrificed your dreams to raise your kid that you had. And in some cases, that's still very true today, depending on the culture of your family and the way that you're brought up. But this is definitely, it paints a picture for us of the kind of woman that Jess is, which I think is a little bit like a Laurie Strode, a little bit different though, because Laurie was a little bit more innocent, but it builds that strong female character, which we don't see a lot of. That's one of the tropes that kind of came in where I thought this movie did a really great job of not, like, you can't blame Black Christmas for the stupid chick in a horror movie trope. Like, I don't think they take the blame for that because they definitely showcase some more strong females.
Not only that, but you can't accuse it of the misogynistic overtones that a lot of slasher films, were purported to have, subsequently. And then Well, and then you see just how like exploitative they were after that point, and then you're like, well, it's kind of hard to, you know, to justify this. But it's just like, look at that. We've got a character who, or they if they're not just complete, ditzes who have no will of their own, then they're either like the really just they feel like in order to be independent or strong or self-assured that you have to be nasty or you have to be unlikable, and that's not the case here either. So it's like they hit the perfect balance before the bad trait began in that genre. And it's nice to see that you can have someone who's a fully realized character. I dare say that she's a more fully realized character than Laurie Strode, at least in if we're talking just the first Halloween, because
Well,
obviously
sure,
she had
because
more.
she's
She
not
had
that
more.
innocent version.
Well, that and she had more movies to be developed.
I would agree with that, and this goes back to what you were saying about this movie kind of fell off to the side in some ways. You'd almost think if you were to come to this one fresh and come to Halloween fresh, you'd be like, well, you would almost think Olivia Hussey and Jess would be the scream queen, not Laurie Strode, Yeah, that would at least what I would think. Like, but everyone thinks Jamie Lee Curtis, she's like the one everyone comes to, and it's like, if this film had half the popularity at the time that Halloween did, and instead it was Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which was
Well, that was another film that at the same time was doing exactly some of the same things. I mean,
no, no. Brandon knows I hated that movie.
But it's very similar in the way that the kills are done, where you don't see a lot.
Right.
A lot of it is left to the imagination. I would argue that
Right.
you see more gore in Black Christmas than you see in Chainsaw.
No, the big issue with me was the extended torture scene.
Even so, the only blood that you see in this film is when she opens up that door and she sees those dead bodies.
Yeah.
It's mostly just implied.
It's mostly
Right.
You don't
Actually,
torture. I just don't.
Dave, did you get to do your first impressions?
No, I did not.
Oh.
Why don't you go ahead and do that before we get too far?
Well, I actually saw this one way before I ever saw the remake, which paled to me in the comparison to this one. But I also think that it added some because of adding the backstory of you see the flashbacks of the sister and all that jazz. But what I liked about this the film was the camera movements from the killer's perspective, and what that brought. I mean, you see more of those movements, more from his point of view. And plus, I mean, you got to think when they finally figure out that the killer is in the house. Look at that fucking machine of a switchboard, man. I mean, they're searching down rows and rows of these telephone lines, and this is a monstrous.
Yeah.
That made me question, like, how I said out loud, I don't know enough about the way that phones used to work to understand what was even going on there, like what he was even doing. I wanted to like research that.
That basically what that was a switchboard machine where he had to follow along where the line was going, and evidently.
Well, I got that much out of it, but I don't understand how it even works.
He was following the currents of electricity where the telephone line was coming from. And when he realized where it actually located, that it was coming from the same damn place that she was calling from, that's when it comes to the realization that, oh my God, the killer is inside the house.
Well, and besides the fact that we obviously get to see it, along with the killer. Besides that, we know that there's a second line, yeah, for the house mother or whatever, and so obviously there's a plausible reason why someone could do that. And
That was a
obviously it's
nice bit
not.
of foreshadowing.
Oh yeah, well, and it's not. Like in Scream, where that was obviously the dawn of the cell phone age, although they were still very much in their infancy. But the point is that the killer it could be near you, but didn't necessarily have to be inside the house, but could be just outside, or could be, even in the house or wherever.
With cell phones. Hi.
Hey, Dustin.
I live.
Barely.
Well, technically, yes.
So, we were talking about the movie Black Christmas, and we didn't get a review of it. So, what was your opinion of the film?
I thought we did National Lampoon this week.
No.
Somebody told me it was National Lampoon tonight.
What?
No one. What?
See,
No, Black Christmas. It's in our group. There's a post and everything. You're tagged in it. I don't know what else to do besides knock on your door with a singing telegram. Should have done that.
You should go. You should get Billy to give him a call.
Really? No kidding.
So he can shout obscenities at me?
No.
Yeah, so that way he can go.
Tell you about your pretty pink pussy.
That's right.
Yeah.
Meaning your cat, who happens to be pink somehow.
Well, okay, fine. Dang, I could have watched a better movie. Well, I didn't rewatch it yet this year. But Black Christmas it's kind of a forerunner of a lot of the slasher movies. Like it predates almost all of them, and I mean I enjoy it. Like it's a good movie. A lot more suspenseful. Like it's got a lot more art in it than a lot of other similar movies.
Katie earlier said that she thought it reminded her of a Galore film. Would you concur?
Yeah, I can see that. It's a little bit. It's got like different sensibility. It's like British, right?
Well,
Canadian.
Canadian?
Yeah.
Whoa. Well, Canadian, British,
Canadian there, hey.
Same bullshit.
No.
Well, it's funny that you did say about a giallo film. I could see it in the sense of a murder mystery, basically, with that kind of element. Although I will say that I felt like this took itself, or at least on the acting level, it took itself far more seriously.
Well,
and paid off, because that's one of my big complaints about giallo as a genre, is that the acting feels very like over the top in a way that doesn't match the otherwise seriousness of the story, because it's not really meant to be campy necessarily, but it comes off as campy without necessarily meaning to. But it's also because they got a better quality of actor here too.
So do we
defensive giallos real quick, before Dave's point? A lot of them are dubbed, and so that's why they seem to have that kind of like goofy quality to them.
Yeah, exactly.
So they're meant to be serious. You just can't you can't understand the original Italian and have it like fully play correctly. Like you have to go with the dub. Like I mean, Pieces is a giallo. That's like not Italian, and it's kind of infamous for how goofy its dub sounds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's a fair point, because I'm not really a fan of dubbing in general. Because it really distracts from the mood of the film as a whole. But I do feel like with this film, they did get just in general, I felt like they got a really good, strong caliber of actor on all levels, really. And there was humor in the film, but it didn't it wasn't out of tone with the rest of it. You know, because I'm right there with Katie in the sense that I love seeing humor in otherwise serious films. It just is a matter of it, fitting the mood overall.
I noticed that, like in a lot of earlier films in that time, of course, the '70s were. I mean, '70s was they were a splatter film renaissance, really, in a lot of ways. Not saying this was one, but in that sense. And a lot of times when you would have that kind of goofy thing going on, they'd even play the goofy music, but they did not do that here. They just kind of played it off as just a brief thing, just a brief interlude to give you more insight into the character, but that was about it.
Can we in fact classify this as a horror film?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's. I read an article, and I subscribed to Fangoria when they came back. And in the first issue, it has an article called "It's Not a Horror Film," which basically discusses like how there was that whole stigma that there used to be around horror films. Like they would talk to somebody about, I can't remember the actual movie they used in the example, but say Seven. Like they would talk to somebody about Seven, and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, it's a psychological thriller. Don't call it a horror film." And objectively, a lot of those types of movies can be called horror films. Like The Silence of the Lambs is a horror film, you know.
And yet
I would agree with that.
they subjectify some of these films as being a psychological thriller, which is in fact its own genre. So,
Speaking of genre, so did anybody bring up like kind of the similarities with Halloween?
Oh yeah.
We definitely did. In fact, we kind of went over how there's an interview on a documentary that I watched on the behind the scenes. It was on the Anchor Blade Blu-ray that I was watching, and Bob Clark, the director, he was actually saying that if he had done that he'd actually talked with John Carpenter, and John Carpenter had asked him, would you do a sequel if you had ever wanted to? And he said, well, no, I'm not in fact doing a sequel, but here's what I would do if I did. I would take our killer, place him in a mental institute. He would break out and then go back to the same sorority house and start killing again. Which 4 years later, what did John Carpenter do? Michael Myers broke out of a mental institute and went back.
Actually,
started killing.
I would like to see the movie Bay of Blood, because that's the only other movie that's kind of credited with this style of movie that would be earlier than this. Has anybody here actually seen Bay of Blood to make a comparison?
Not me.
That is an old one, right?
Mario Bava.
Oh yeah, that's really old.
Barbara Steele was in it, correct? Or no?
I will have seen it because I have it ordered, but I have been told I've been reading up on the slasher genre, and of course the traditional slasher as we know it today, all the tropes and everything, it goes back to really 4 films really, which they point out as Bay of Blood, Black Christmas, Texas Chainsaw, and Halloween. The most obvious one is the one I forget.
And again, like I was saying last night, some people would include a couple of additional films, Psycho. And I would count this one as being no more slasher than Psycho, frankly. I thought it was more a psychological thriller than slasher.
Oh, Black Christmas is a lot more exciting than Psycho.
But there's some similarities, I think, for sure.
Yep.
And also, it is kind of a slow burn because you have the one disappear very early on, and then it's a while before anyone else goes, and then It gets a
You ever
little
check
creepy.
the attic? It's weird.
Actually, the slow burn is the only thing that I disliked about the film, and it was just about. But that's about how the time was for those types of films, was that the plot would move along in little increments, and that to me it always, for some reason, I always would get drowsy during the middle and have to rewind it, or actually go back to an earlier scene in today's technology, in order to get it
I
all.
still call it rewinding.
Yeah, I do too.
I do. Too.
Well, my take on it real quick is that, I mean, a slow burn is fine as long as it's done properly and it's effective. But even with like a good slow burn, it can be a bit too slow of a burn, you know?
Yeah.
There was some movie I saw not too long ago. Oh yeah, I rewatched the Blair Witch Project, and that movie is definitely slow burn, but in a good way, because it does keep your interest. I feel like this was. I wouldn't exactly say this was slow burn. I think it was just the right
Slower
amount.
paced. I thought it was just slower paced, but not necessarily a slow burn.
Maybe slower than what we're used to today, where everything has
Sure.
to. Well, everything nowadays like has to move at lightning speed, or else the audience gets bored. Which
And I'm the perfect person to comment on that because I don't really watch movies that come out now. Very rarely. For every 10 movies I watch, 3 of them are newer. The other 7 are, before 1990. So,
yeah. Well, the thing
I was
that's
fine with the pace.
yeah. Well, I don't know. It seemed like it was proper movie pace, but
Mhm.
that's according to the standards of old school. I mean, because the standards of movies nowadays is basically that they have to move, really, really fast.
Well,
Otherwise,
sure,
American
because we got to have everything now,
Attention spans
immediately.
have really shrunk
Oh
over
yeah.
time. And the most of the time, I don't mind a slow burn film. It's just something about the middle of the film always has me
Right.
dropping off. And I don't know what it is, but it's just that middle part of the film. I just keep dropping off.
And I definitely didn't mean it in a bad way with this one. I liked the pacing of this film, and I liked that it wasn't all up front with the killing and the disappearing and all that stuff. That they took some time with the characters. But and speaking of the victims, we haven't had anyone comment yet on the dorm mother. Would you?
Oh, she was
She
great.
she was funny.
She was a hoot. She
You
was one
gotta
of my
love
favorites.
you gotta love how lax the rules are in this
And she
this
She
sorority.
had a liquor thing in every spot.
But no, she was hiding it.
You know you have problems when you're pulling the liquor bottle out of the tank of the toilet.
I forgot about that.
But I like the scene with her and the missing girl's father, and she's trying desperately not to make it look like a den of iniquity, and he's
Yeah.
He's like, should I have sent my daughter here? And she's like, oh yeah, it's fine. She notices like a poster of like nude people, and she just like stands in front of it.
Well,
Puts her hand up on it.
Picture, the previous dead mother's picture is on it, and you can see the picture depicts her middle finger starting to come up.
Which that's so funny. I thought that was great. It's like, yeah, that's what grandma's really up to.
I really want that poster. I always have wanted that poster since I first saw it many years ago when I saw this.
Do they ever print one? That would be an awesome set to put in I don't know, one of these Severin or something should make a set with this on Blu-ray and a cool T-shirt and a cool poster of the old house mother with her middle finger up.
Be awesome.
She's there inspiring us all.
Hell, I would even take a full-blown poster of it.
Well, I mean, they've replicated the I Want to Believe X-Files poster to death, so why not this?
So
there is the release of this that I have is the Shout Factory one. Years ago, and it's pretty great. So I don't know why it'd be cool to have fun little extras like that, but I don't necessarily know if you would need another release of Black Christmas, because the shout release like was so complete. I think it's 2 discs, and there was a lot of stuff on there.
There was a lot of stuff on the Bay Blue, believe it or not.
I think they had all the Anchor Bays. I think they had all the Anchor Bay extras and then their own stuff, because that seems to be how they do it. I was watching their Candyman earlier, and it looks like they got everything from the last DVD, along with a bunch of their whole new stuff. Kind of fun thing to see the new unrated cut and hear all the and hear all the commentaries. You have to watch Candyman 5 times.
Wow.
I thought that was really funny.
Clever.
Interesting. So ultimately, I know that I somewhat touched on that machine of a switchboard, but Dustin, what did you think about that switchboard? That monstrosity where they finally found out that the killer was inside the house.
Oh, are you talking about like the ancient carved from stone piece of technology that they were using?
Yeah.
Sometimes in these movies, you see something like that, and it's like it almost kind of takes you out of it. It's like
Why?
Because, well, at this point, I mean, it's so far removed from it's like that. You know,
it made me want to know how it works. That was my immediate reaction. Like, I need to research how this works.
It just makes you wonder. But it's also amazing how far we've come considering that time period.
It's like looking at a giant.
Everything had to be monstrosity. Big.
I mean, I grew up with rotary phones.
My grandma had one.
Wow, boy, that makes me feel old. We had one when I was. That's all we had when I was small. I mean, I wasn't like we didn't get a regular phone until like I was 10 or 11.
We had like the push button, like phones that looked like the rotary phones, but they had the push buttons like from the phone company. I remember having that when I was a kid, but I remember like the phone that hung on the wall with like the super extra long cord so that my mom could go around the entire kitchen and like swat us in the ass, like still on with a phone on her shoulder, super long cord.
My grandparents had the phone where you had to you picked up this the one ear of it and it had a string and you actually had to crank it.
And a tin can on one end, and then the other person had a tin can on the other end, and you had to pull it real tight.
There we go.
I really love those old school phones where the earpiece and the mouthpiece were 2 different things. I have a fondness for that, and I have a fondness for the rotary style.
You should do that. Have that kind of phone in your next noir film.
I would love to. I'd love to because I love. I'm a big fan of retro things anyway. But
I have a couple of those sitting in my grandfather's basement.
Well, it's just interesting whenever people say that such and such took them out of the movie or something, because I can never really understand what that means exactly. Well, more in general, but in this specific instance, it's just, that's how it was back then. That's how they conducted calls, and
usually that's kind of how I feel too, because it's I remember like the time period that I remember. It's set in a different time period. Blah blah blah. It just can be kind of like surprising sometimes, because it's like, wow, that looks so impractical. And it's like,
I think what it does is I think it dates the movie. I don't know that it necessarily takes you out of it, but maybe the dating of it takes
much
you
better
out
way to phrase what I was.
Well, it can, sure, but again, I don't ever. I've heard that from, well, not from this group, but like other people I have heard online who get like really wigged out about, that such and such, just because it's old, therefore it feels dated, and it's like, well, that's kind of a really cheap, easy way to dismiss a movie that happens to not be recent. Number one, and number two, it's like, well, movies cannot help but be of their time, unless they're like the Wizard of Oz and set, in their own world, pretty much. And even then it's somewhat dated in terms of how it was filmed and everything. But it's just, it just usually whenever people say that, in my experience, it's a very facile way to dismiss it. And that's now there are movies that are almost explicitly dated in a way because of the fact that they rely heavily on the technology of their time, like how You've Got Mail was all about dial-up internet, which hardly anyone uses anymore, and then War Games had the old Cold War era computer defense systems, and the old whatever that would have been, Commodore 64 computer games and stuff. It's like it's a great movie despite that, but it's like, yeah, that kind of thing is begging to be dated a little bit more,
Well,
just
like
because the plot hinges on it so much.
like even
Exactly.
in our own discussion groups here, Perfect Blue is slightly dated because you got young people who are barely computer literate. It's like right at the start of the internet. But as far as the topic of ancient things taking you out of the film, one trope that this film did fall into, that I don't know if it was a thing already, but it certainly became a thing later, was people who were definitely too old playing younger people.
Yeah.
Olivia Hussey and I can't remember the name of the first victim, but they were like 22 and 23, and they were easily the youngest members of the cast. Keir Dullea was like 17 years older than them, or 15 years older.
Well, that and Margot Kidder,
Yeah.
she looked like she could have played Lois Lane right then and there, which
Right.
obviously it wasn't a long time after that she did. But it's just like, I'm like, don't you have to go back to the planet there, Lois? What are you doing? What are you doing? You just expect Clark Kent to be in there, like, oh,
She was
Lois,
Lois.
Lois, what are you doing? You're under. Shh, Clark, I'm under cover.
Like Galea plays an astronaut in 2001, and this film came out 6 years later.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, yeah, he went from speaking to Hal to being a college student. And incidentally, one weird thing that occurs to me is it's the timing of this, because the dude that played Hal, I believe his name was Douglas Rain, passed,
Yep.
2 weeks ago? So that was very eerie timing to me, at least. Yeah, that little connection there, but tenuous, I know, but whatever.
I wish I remembered more of this. Like I don't know from who, but somebody told me we were doing National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, so I watched that.
You're not alone on that, because I thought we were until Brandon told me otherwise last night. I don't know how I got the wires crossed, but whatever.
Yeah, there's a post, where I said, should we do it like this? And then I asked everybody to tell me what they thought, and nobody did. So I said, okay, look for a new post where I make an executive decision. And so then I did that.
Okay.
And you were all tagged in it.
It
but-
was.
The posts in the group.
It was National Lampoon's up until that post occurred, and then it changed gears.
Oh, well, fuck whoever made that post. What?
Hey, fuck you too. Fuck you for not looking at it.
I've been doing finals. Like, I haven't been on Facebook.
Well, dude, I don't know. Should I send a St. Bernard, or like how else should I get a hold of you?
Carrier.
Change it. I don't understand.
It wasn't even
we should
set.
get him.
I asked everyone's opinion, like, do you guys like this order? And nobody said anything, so I assume no one gave a shit.
I think we needed to send Billy. That was the best way.
I was gonna say, I mean,
Right,
he's gonna be like the
It was in
enforcer.
between my work days.
All right.
Ah.
So,
Ah.
Which that's another thing I have to say with characterization.
Mhm.
The character of the killer Billy, he, despite us not knowing his backstory or whatever, being able to kind of discern what it might have been based on what he talks about, I really love the fact that he can do multiple voices and they sound just that right mixture of convincing and like they could conceivably be someone else, and yet also clearly being the voice of someone who is talented enough to do multiple voices. Like, in other words, they didn't get multiple actors to do multiple voices, and they're like, oh yeah, that's the same person, and it obviously isn't. But in this case, I felt like it was the same person, and yet that person clearly was talented enough to do all those voices. So that tells us something right there about this person, that he's definitely several cuts above your typical slasher movie villain.
Do we even know? Is there like someone that plays him? Do we even know if there is an actual? Because I mean, we see an eyeball, we see some hands. Is it always the same person every time?
They said something in the IMDb about who was who in that one. I think there were 2 people that did the physical part of it and like 3 who did the voices, but I don't remember right offhand.
So, evidently, Billy was Albert J. Dunk.
It's kind of a weird name.
Um,
I mean,
Yeah,
it could be that it could be like in the remake where there are multiple killers. You just because again they never really gave
I
a
haven't
full
seen
on
the remake. God
explanation.
damn it!
Yeah,
Oh,
no,
well,
we
shoot,
don't. We
sorry.
don't find out who our killer is. That was one of the things about this movie that I thought was actually it worked. You know, I
Yeah.
thought I was going to be disappointed that there wasn't going to be a payoff, but the fact that there wasn't a payoff was kind of the payoff. So
Yeah,
it
I
did
did
good in
not
that way.
want the boyfriend to be the guy. I didn't want him to be the guy, and luckily he wasn't, as far as we know.
Oh, this is
But
one of the first movies that did that, where they had like an open ending like that. It's like he's in the house. Oh shit! End. Out here.
well, and I love that it ends just on the ringing of the telephone. Like that's so eerie and chilling, and because you know that her time is just around the corner, and
Yeah.
yeah, this
Well,
just
that
that was
ending was just chilling.
it handled it. It was handled really well.
it was definitely a creepy ending. It was left to the imagination, definitely. So, did what did anyone think about the father that had actually come to look for Claire? Or
Well, I think I mean, as far as him as a character, I don't know. I don't have really an opinion about him as what I thought of him as a character, but I felt like his presence really helped to set up like kind of a realistic, you know, and sometimes you see in horror movies where somebody goes missing or somebody dies and you really don't, it doesn't come through with the characters. It doesn't seem like they're really all that bothered by it. They're bothered by it for a second and then they get over it and go on with life. And here you've got this dad like hanging around looking for his daughter, and this is an ongoing thing. And I feel like it adds to the realness, you know, which was what was made this story so good, like so believable to me.
yeah,
and he did a good job with the role. He did. I think he did a good job of. It was understated, but like the one scene where they're in the search party and the other person's child is missing, and they both come across the body or like, and you see like his palpable relief, but on the other hand, like, you know,
Well, we never see the child's body, if you notice.
No. Well, we know who it is, though. We know it's the woman's child. That is
Yeah, but we never see the body. But even I mean, we don't really need to. 'Cause
yeah.
I think we get the idea. But well, it's interesting because I don't think that the dad. I mean, I agree with Katie, and actually, they. What's funny is that well, on the one hand, they could have done what Scream did, which was they set up the father as possibly a red herring, which then they don't ultimately go anywhere with that in either movie. In this one, they don't set him up as a red herring, but then like in Scream, they actually make fun of the fact that a key character dies, and then other characters don't really seem to be sad that she's gone, and they just kind of forget about her. And then here, it's the opposite, where it's her presence is very clearly, or her lack of presence is very clearly on everyone's minds, not to mention the father.
Mm-hmm.
One thing about that, though, there was one thing that bugged me about the movie, and that was, as bothered as everyone was, as worried as everyone was, no one checked the attic.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was a flaw,
strange.
especially the cops not checking the attic too.
Yeah, I mean, they had bodies missing, and there was a whole like area that they did not search of the house. It just big
Okay.
plot hole.
I just have one quick question to all of you. When the officer was told not to tell her that the dude was in the house,
What does he do?
what does she do? She does not go out the door; she goes up the stairs.
Yes.
She's trying to save her
Well,
friends.
But then,
Right.
even if she went out, the door was locked anyways. But regardless, she didn't listen to. What would have done? Would you have gone looking for your friends, or would you have actually gone out the door?
Well, that guy,
Well, it's kind of believable that she would look for her friends because she thought they were still alive.
not to mention that
Well-
guy did not exactly create a sense of believable authority and competence in his early.
I was gonna
Well,
say
he's
he
a
was
bumbling
a moron.
idiot. He doesn't even know what fellatio is. Come on.
I was get, well that was a good setup that we didn't even realize was a setup until that point, because we think it's just comic relief, and it is, but then it's also a pretty key bit of character, because he's clearly not a good cop. He doesn't know how to handle people under stress and how to, have good manners on the phone, and he just exacerbates the situation. And he does the one thing he's not supposed to do, which is tell her that, and she freaks out and is inside the house when she shouldn't be, even though she doesn't know that.
And that fellatio comment was not the only sexually related comment that Miss Margot Kidder's character made. She also made a comment about turtles.
That's right.
Their mating.
Turtles having sex for 3 days straight at the
And
zoo.
you love turtles, David.
Exactly. I noticed that comment right away, actually.
Well, and let's also not forget that one thing that does perhaps date the movie, you could say, just in terms of something that, not so much story-wise, but just something that content-wise wouldn't necessarily fly today, is the fact that she's giving a kid alcohol.
Oh yeah, that was hilarious.
Yeah, which there's no way you'd get away with that today, even in a horror film. But even then, I thought, I don't know, that's also just kind of a element of her character, that she's not really someone who cares too much about the rules, while at the same time not being too, I don't know, I never really got the sense that she was malicious or anything. She was just more fun. And so even with something like that, which could totally get you in major trouble, legally speaking, even with that, like, you could see that she's not like trying to, take him in the back room and molest him or anything.
Well, and in terms of things that wouldn't fly in movies, what I found interesting was, for an early 70s film, I thought it was really graphic with that first phone call, like some of the things that our killer was saying on the phone. I was like, wow, for 74, I'm not expecting to hear the C word that many times. It was, I thought, kind of, I don't know, ahead of its time, maybe.
Well, yeah, I
Pretty
mean,
jarring.
the Exorcist
they use
did
language
a
like
little
that
bit more,
usually.
but-
So I mean that surprised
Everyone
me
said
too.
that at the same time. What? Okay.
I was agreeing with you. It was surprising to me too.
Oh
You don't
yeah,
hear stuff
well,
like that
it
all that often.
definitely was out there for then and today. Although The Exorcist did beat it by 1 year as far as vulgarity of that variety is concerned.
Yeah, I mean, Triple P.
Yeah, I really do think that this film was overlooked at that point in time, and I think I think now people are starting to realize that this film grandfathered in what many of the slashers, would follow in its, in its trend, So
Wasn't Herschel Gordon Lewis really functional at that time? I mean, he had been working since the late 60s, but I think he was still doing a lot of works during the 70s, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Of course, again, that's a different type, but at the same time, if you're talking about anything when you talk about blood, or like I said, I always considered the late 60s, early 70s as sort of that time where those types of films really ruled.
True.
So many of them being lost, of course, because they weren't printed on very good film stock, but still.
Well, in 1970, he did The Wizard of Gore. He did The Gore Girls in 1972. So yeah, he did. And in 2002, he did Blood Feast 2, All You Can Eat. But yeah. He somewhat some of his gore godfather of gore films during the 70s at least. So
of course this was extremely tame compared to that.
Oh,
true. So did anyone else have anything else to add here?
yeah, that was trippy. I have my computer connects to my soundbar through like Bluetooth, and sometimes it just decides to turn itself on. So if any of you guys heard a very loud boom coming from my end, that's what that was. Well, this is such a great movie, and I really wish I'd known that we were to revisit it today. But I remembered a fair amount of it, and sorry I couldn't do better. That's kind of something I'd like to get out of the way.
At least you're prepared for next week.
So.
You're already ahead of time.
And I have not seen that movie all the way through ever. Christmas Vacation, so that'll be something.
Well, it's like, let's change the order for no reason. Like that was. I'm mad.
There was a reason, Dustin, and I posted about it on the page. I said that for those local to Milwaukee, the Oriental is screening Scrooge on the 14th. So if anybody wanted to actually go and watch the screening of Scrooge at the Oriental, we could then cover it the last week on the 18th. So I moved Scrooge to the 18th, and I moved Christmas Vacation to the week before that, and then I moved Black Christmas to now, since now is the closest to Halloween that we're going to get in Christmas movies, and since it was a horror movie, I figured it was a good transition from out of some of our horror movies. We just did a horror movie last week too, to transition into the Christmas season. So but I tagged you in the post. I don't know. I'll get that carrier pigeon next time though.
After everybody was like, we're doing Black Christmas this week. Great, yeah, like that's. I still think that's stupid. I'm sorry.
Well, if you paid attention, then you would know.
I've been working like on my assignments all week. Like I haven't been paying attention to Facebook.
Well, I don't know how else to get a hold of you.
We have lives outside of the show.
I'll since Dustin, I've got your number. I'll text you.
We need Billy's help because he doesn't let phone calls go. He stays on them.
Well, about the actual movie, I first saw this when I started watching like the big staple movies. Like I think I saw this in like 2013, and I was pretty happy with it. Like I thought it was great. I was sort of introduced to it by Bravo's 100 Scariest Movie Moments, which I think the ending of Black Christmas was somewhere in there. It was a long show. But it was like, oh, okay. It was basically, the program was basically like a list of things to go out and see when I started exploring this genre. And I was pretty happy with Black Christmas. And I got the Shout Factory Blu-ray, I think it was 2016. And it took a while to get through because it's like, I'm pretty sure it is 2 discs worth of like content. Let me just double check it. Yeah, it's 2 discs, and each one was pretty full. So I ended up being kind of sick of Black Christmas at the end of sort of like real Christmas at the end of watching those. But yeah, it would have been nice to see it again. I'll probably end up seeing it again anyway because it's it's like an appropriate holiday movie.
Oh yeah. And if there's anything, a thing that you wanted to add to this week's that you didn't, in future episodes, if there's anyone who misses, something, I'm going to allow some period of time for people to talk about things that maybe they didn't the previous episode. Is that cool?
I'll watch it next week and then have like a quick rant for next week.
Sounds good. So, alrighty. So, did anyone else have anything else that they wanted to add that they might want to share about the movie? Or do you think that we covered everything?
Go see this movie. Like, find a copy and watch it. It's good.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, very underrated, I have to say.
Not like
barely
or anything. Like, if you're into suspense, I mean, it probably would work better for you. I mean, the violence when it happens is like brutal and nasty, but it's not like overdone in any real way.
Yeah,
Like,
it's pretty minimal, and it's as much as is needed to get the story, to get the idea, and that's
you see what you need exactly.
Exactly, and that's a nice thing. Whatever element of film that you're working with, it's as much as you need for anything. I think that ultimately results in a better film, and I think John Carpenter certainly knew that when it came to the story of Halloween, but also the actual filming of it, because they only got as much coverage as they absolutely needed, and that's why they were so economical. It's art from adversity, as they say, but any filmmaking element, just as much as is required just to make that particular thing. And it's, hate to say follow the recipe, because that makes it sound like it's just that anyone can do it, and that's not the case. But at the same time, the statue of David only requires this many chisels at the marble and not that many. So it's a delicate balance.
Alrighty. Unless anyone else has anything else to add, I think on that note we shall close this discussion. So why don't we start with you, Brandon, and tell us a little bit about where you're from and what you do.
All right. Well, I am Septum Sen of Septum Sen versus the World. We are a YouTube channel that covers physical media in all its various forms, and of course and we praise the preservation of that media. Of course, our most recent update as we gear up for the holiday season will be following a review of the film Christmas Cruelty, which is an interesting Norwegian film, to say the least. And, of course, we will be doing a top 15 Christmas films that we actually should say holiday films, because it follows the holidays, and specials that are not on the main path, such as, not the main classics, but, of course, those less traveled.
Or like the Star Wars holiday special, which
exactly
which was aired around Christmas time, but is called a holiday special because it's about Life Day, a Wookiee holiday that I don't think is ever referenced in any Star Wars related thing ever again.
And it's still a better Star Wars movie than anything we've seen theatrically in years. Stop taking drugs. The Last Jedi was trash.
It did have a great animated sequence, but that's pretty much what we've been doing. I also do occasional reviews for Inside Movies Galore and occasional collaborations. Usually when I see something that has no physical media, I try to make sure that I give that review to Movies Galore to post.
Alrighty. Moving over to Dane. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? What you do?
I'm Dane Kyle, independent filmmaker out of Charlotte, North Carolina. I have some good news. So I did a segment of, I did a short film that has officially been included in the horror anthology feature film Creepypasta. I officially signed the distribution paperwork today, and so that means that it will, finally get out there. I don't exactly know when.
Blind short, correct?
Say what?
That would be your big blind short film, correct?
Actually, no. This film was called Topsy Turvy Town, and it was based.
Okay.
It was a lost episode creepypasta
Yeah.
film. It was original creation of mine, and I officially signed the paperwork to get it distributed, and so that'll be coming out. And then also, The Big Blind is my film noir short that will be included in another anthology called Drive-In Grindhouse, which is nice. I mean, I didn't really conceive it as a grindhouse thing, but at the same time, I could see why it might fit, in there alongside other things. Because, a lot of, certain kinds of noir could be, put alongside, alongside films like that. But anyway, so that's on the horizon, and got. Oh yes, I forgot. I did another one, another segment for another anthology called Clownsploitation, and that film actually got onto Trauma Now not too long ago. I think just a few days ago. So anybody who has Trauma Now can watch it. My segment is called The Call of Cutlass, with both of those with a K. And features me playing a creepy clown. So it's pretty cool if you want to see me act.
I still need to see Terrifier.
Oh yeah, that one has Catherine Cochran in it.
Well, the guy who plays the clown follows me on Twitter, and he's pretty fun to interact with. So
that's cool. Yeah, Catherine Cochran's in there, and she was in Return to Nukem High Volume 1 and 2, and she's nice too on Twitter.
I kind of got screwed though. I ordered some stuff from Epic Pictures. Apparently they do Turbo Kid too, because Turbo Kid stuff was all over their store. But for the Black Friday sale, I bought the Kane Hodder documentary, the Penn Jillette director's cut movie, and then Terrifier. And they sent me the DVD of Terrifier instead of the Blu-ray, so I have to wait for them to send me the replacement, which they actually did do, and fairly quickly. It's just kind of man, I'm holding out watching it for the actual hard copy. I don't want to just jump on Netflix, but it's I'm mad at that. And then, of course, there's the news story, post office taking day off because President Bush died. And it's oh, fuck that. He finds one more way to screw everyone.
Yeah, well.
They won't ship this far east, which is sad.
What, Epic Pictures?
Yeah, they will not ship this far east. They only ship to the Midwest and to the West. They will not ship to the East Coast.
That's
They're
weird.
an American company, aren't they?
They're supposed to be an international company.
Well, they don't ship to the East Coast. I've tried to get them to ship to me.
I'm calling bullshit on that. That makes no sense.
I've tried multiple times on their site because I wanted to get that Penn Jillette movie and a couple others, and they will not ship to here.
Huh. Which Penn Jillette movie?
Director's cut.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
That must be a new one that I haven't seen. And I really like. I think we got to at some point we got to do the Aristocrats, which he and Paul Verbenza did.
Copy of that.
Well, I used to listen to his podcast a while ago, and back in like 2015, 2014, he was talking about director's cut. It's like, yeah, do our GoFundMe for this. We're kind of making up as we go along. And then I just kind of stopped hearing about it. And I think like early this year, I heard it's like, oh yeah, director's cut is out. And it's like, oh, that did get made? Because it sounded like they probably weren't going to get the funding for it. Like, it was just an idea they had. Yeah, it came out, and it's sitting over there on my shelf, and it's probably going to be a good time.
Well, in any case, since you're talking, Dustin, why don't you tell a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Well, I live here in Milwaukee and collect horror everything while still somehow being in school. My mind just went blank. I took an involuntary nap, and that's why I was late. So I have my own channel called The Crypt of Horrors, where I just try to do like real quick, hey, look what I found out movie hunting today, or here's my pre-order that we're gonna open up on camera for whatever. I think my most recent one was I ordered the Trapper mask from the Dead by Daylight official store, and I did a quick review of that, and it's like, okay, let's open the box together, and so you get my full reaction to what's inside. So you can actually bitch about like how they screwed it up yet again. So I'm also on Twitter with that name, The Crypt of Horrors. I need to find a Santa outfit so that I can update my profile picture, though. I have an Instagram for my horror collection at DHRHunter, all one word. I have editorial power at Movies Galore, but I've been so busy with other projects, like I haven't put anything on there yet. But I mean, I do still have that review that's like mostly done. I just need to, wrap it up. And I don't know, I kind of do a lot of different things, so it's hard to remember.
Alrighty. Going over to Katie, why don't you let us know who you are and what you do?
I'm Katie Cadaver from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I'm a body positive horror artist and alternative model. You can find me on Facebook and Twitter and Patreon, and also on Instagram at 3RDEYE0PEN. I'm also the makeup artist for horror punk band Ratbat Spider. You can listen to them at ratbatspider.bandcamp.com. I'm also a dead girl for Dead Girl's Dark Coffin Classics, and you can watch episodes at vimeo.com/DDCC. I'm a Tromette for Trauma Entertainment. You can find all things trauma at trauma.com. I am a performer and producer for Grindhouse Tees Burlesque Productions. You can find us on Facebook. And I'm also an editor for Movies Galore of Milwaukee. And I've set up our schedule for the December films. Some of you pay attention to that. And for those of you that do, next week is National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. And then the week after, we'll be doing Scrooged. And then I don't know if we're taking a couple weeks off. I know I am taking a couple weeks off for Christmas and New Year's, but then we're going to come back with Die Hard on January 8th. So that's our upcoming lineup.
Yep.
That was the lineup we got after.
Yeah, you want to bitch some more about it on the air, or should we maybe talk about it later? What do you think?
I know. I think the drama is fun for some people.
Perhaps.
Well, as we say around these parts, save the drama for your llama.
Going over to Kabuki Jake, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do?
All right, my name's Jake. I'm also here in Central Virginia, and I frequently guest on Septum Sin vs. the World. And I, too, am looking forward to this top 15 list for Christmas. And I'm working on several review videos. If you watch, I do occasional solo ones. One series will be where I'm reviewing the films in my personal collection that are part of the Criterion collection. I'm working hard on The Princess Bride right now, so sometime soon I'll have some of those ready to post. And I'm also working on reviews for the Sentai Premium sets, and I'm closing in on finishing Chihaya Furu. So that one is that review will be made very soon. Actually have some time this week to focus on reviews, which is nice. I don't get that very often. Uh, partly because one of my gigs is slinging Christmas trees that are rapidly coming to a close, thank God. Uh, and I do have my own channel as well, Codebookie Jake. I don't update very often, but there's some good videos on there, and there will be more occasionally added. I think I picked up a subscriber, so that's kind of cool. And I guess that'll do it for me now.
Alrighty. And my name is David Strege. I run Inside Movies Galore, but I think I can say with pleasure that I run it with all of you. And also, I write for a blog called Movies Galore for Movies Galore of Milwaukee, and you can definitely check some of my reviews out there. But I've been hanging around on YouTube doing YouTube reviews, and we have now hit 140 subscribers. So
we're winning. We're rolling it.
we're moving up, which is a lot since when we first started a couple of years ago.
What were we at, like 20 last year? Yeah, we're actually, I think.
I mean, on our own, that's actually doing fairly well. So like and subscribe, everyone, and definitely check our page and channel out. So, say good night, everyone.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.